Father's Day's coming up, and Ricky and Kelly at Groenfell Meadery in Vermont want to help you celebrate by offering Father's Day mead gift bundles. You can send Dad, or drop hints that you want one, Dad-themed mead bundles that include a variety of mead, a drinking vessel, that's a glass, or a mead horn, and a tasting card. All bundles are 10% off, and orders over $70 will automatically get free shipping within the contiguous United States. You can choose from bundles like the Classic Dad, the Sour Dad, the Bold Dad, or you can build your own version using the Case Builder page. Forget neckties or soap on a rope. Pick up Father's Day mead gift bundles at family-owned and operated Groenfell.com. That's Groenfell. Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, June 3rd, 2021. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Chris Colby gets back on the soapbox about one of his favorite brewing techniques, partial mashing. It's also a great way to beat the heat by bringing batches inside this summer. And Chris gives us a preview of the book that he's currently writing. If you go to basicbrewing.com, you can find archives of our audio and video shows, and if you go to basicbrewingshop.com, you can find our DVDs and our brewers' logbooks. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Basic Brewing and find our show page on Facebook as well. If you want to support us financially, check out patreon.com/basicbrewing, and thanks to everybody who's helping out in that way. If you go to patreon.com/basicbrewing, you can see a long list of stuff that you can access if you sign up as a supporter. If you're a financial supporter, you've already seen the video episode featuring my no-boil pineapple puree NEPA that Steve and I tasted together in the kitchen for the first time since the pandemic. Steve had high praise for that beer, saying it's one of the best root beers he's tasted. Wow, that is high praise. Got some good feedback from that episode, including David on Patreon, who shared some of his experience with brewing with fruit. David says, "Awesome! So stoked to see Steve physically back in the studio. Just cracked one open for that event. The process Steve describes was what I did 3 times with my raspberry Hefeweizen. I added 250 grams per liter of raspberry onto a fresh batch of Hefe and let it ferment out for a few days, then racked it over to a bottling bucket while leaving the solids behind." And David says, I'd advise to use a filter at the end of the hose to the bottling bucket. And then bottle condition from there. The end product was a bit tart, but retained a beautiful fruit flavor and aroma, as well as a glowing red hue. That sounds delicious. One might say it's a pinkish hue, maybe? Seinfeld reference. Thanks, David. As I said in the episode, I didn't let my fruit puree ferment in the cold keg, but Steve was wondering in the show what impact letting the yeast work on the beer in a secondary instead of not fermenting in the keg would have. So I appreciate that feedback from David. Let's take a look into the mailbag. Jeff from southern New Hampshire writes, "I know your classic tagline is that your stir plate gets dusty because you don't use starters when using Imperial. However, I have a patch of Paramount that I bought because I was excited to make a seltzer and didn't get around to it, and it's now past the 4-month shelf life." Jeff says, if I want to try to revitalize this past prime yeast, what do you recommend as a starter since the yeast is tailored for seltzer fermentations? Well, as you can guess, I didn't know. I had a guess, but I didn't know. So I shared Jeff's letter with Casey from our friends and sponsors at Imperial Organic Yeast. Casey wrote back, "You can absolutely make a starter, though if your pack is just a bit expired, you may not need to. If you do move forward with a starter, these are our recommendations." Casey says 10 grams of sugar per 100 milliliters of water and 2 grams per liter of yeast nutrient. So there you go. You appreciate that, Casey, and I appreciate the question, Jeff. Usually you'd use malt extract, of course, to make starters, but apparently for Imperial Paramount, which is great for making seltzers, just plain sugar is the ticket. And that's just a sample of the great technical support and customer support you can get from Imperial Organic Yeast. Jeff is right. My stir plate is dusty because I don't use it anymore for moderate gravity 5-gallon batches. With 200 billion cells per easy-to-open package and a recommended shelf life of 4 months, my airlock is usually bubbling before bedtime. Ask your local homebrew shop about Imperial Organic Yeast or check them out at imperialyeast.com. That's imperialyeast.com. Okay, Chris Colby, author of How to Make Hard Seltzers, speaking of seltzers, and other great homebrewing books, loves to talk about partial mashing, and I'd be willing to bet it's one of the most underappreciated techniques of homebrewing, combining the best of all grain and extract. And while I had him on the line talking about partial mashing, I got a preview of the next book that he's working on right now. Chris Colby, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Hey, James. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, we're going to talk about something that we've talked about multiple times before, but it's been several years since we've broached the topic. And homebrewing has evolved a bit, a little bit, due to different techniques that may change the approach that we talk about this particular technique. But you've been a fan of partial mashing for a long time. Why?
Yeah, partial mashing is a great sort of a hybrid technique between extract and all grain brewing, and it has almost all the flexibility of all grain brewing, but you're able to do it sort of, especially if if you're an all grain brewer like me, you've got a rig that's outside, and if you live in Texas, it's a billion degrees during the summer, and so you're sweating your sack off if you're going to brew a batch of beer. But
your grain sack, just to be more specific.
There, yeah. But with this, you can move inside and you can brew beer that's every bit as good. You're just inside in the air conditioning doing it. And if you're an extract brewer, it actually gives you some added flexibility that you don't have brewing straight extract beers. And also, if you're an extract brewer, it lowers your per batch cost slightly.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of reasons to do it.
Yeah, I like all grain brewing, but I also like extract brewing. I mean, there's nothing that makes you appreciate extract brewing than not doing it for a while, and then you get back into it, and it's like, whoa, this is so easy. Like the batch, the no boil New England IPA that I did the other day, where I just brought the extract up to boiling temperature, shut off the heat, put some hops in it, let it stand for 10 minutes, and there's your beer. After you chill and bitch the yeast, of course. But so there's some flexibility that extract gives you. But also, I've found, or maybe it's worth doing like a side-by-side taste, but extract is pretty good, but all grain, brewing with some grains in there, it kind of adds some sort of grainy freshness that a pure extract beer doesn't seem to have.
Yeah, when they manufacture malt extract, they make wort to start with, and then they under very low pressure, they put through these columns that boils off the liquid, and when you're boiling off the water, that also boils off a lot of the volatile compounds. So when you rehydrate that wort and bring it up to the gravity that it was initially, it's the malt aroma is sort of subdued compared to what you'd have in an all grain wort. And one of the best benefits of partial mashing is you just add that back into your beers. They're going to smell malty again, mm-hmm. Compared to an all grain batch.
And we're not talking about steeping specialty grains, which is one step that maybe a half step that 100% extract brewers take to be more all grainy. You actually have to do some mashing. You actually have to reach some temperatures and hold them there to do some actual conversion of the grain. So if you're an extract brewer and you want to move into partial mashing, let's go from that scale first. Why would you want to do it, and what are the steps that you're going to have to add to your extract regimen?
Well, if you're an extract brewer, there's a lot of reasons that you might want to get into it. There's, as you say, adding back the aroma of actual malt. You can make a beer that's lower in color. If all your sort of quote unquote pale beers turn out sort of ambery, and you want to get an actual like pale straw color, partial mashing will help with that. If your if your extract beers sort of lack in bitterness, there's a effect where the thicker your wort is, the less alpha acids are converted to iso alpha acids in the boil. So partial mash can help you obtain higher bitterness. Malt extracts are typically not as fermentable as an all grain wort. So if you want a more fermentable wort to make a beer that finishes at a lower TG, lower FG, and be more dry, that can help you with that.
And that can vary by extract brand, right? I mean, there's some extracts that are pretty fermentable, and others that really won't go down a lot in the end for gravity for some reason.
Yeah, some of them are designed, that you dump a can of malt extract into a bunch of water, and so the malt extract isn't in and of itself not that fermentable, because they want you to end up with a beer with a certain amount of body. But if you're making your own beer or whatever, it can be it can lead to beers that are just a little bit too sweet, a little bit too chewy. And it varies by malt extract, manufacturer and brand. But typically, an all grain wort is more fermentable, and capable of being fermented to a drier state than a extract wort.
Mm-hmm. And on the if you're doing an extract boil or an extract beer, you don't have to boil for a full hour. And I guess, there's been a lot of experiments, like the Brillosophy folks, and some experiments that we've done as well, where you don't really technically have to boil all grain worts as much as you used to, or at least as much as we thought you used to. But one way that you were talking about lowering the color of your beer, another strategy in addition to doing an all grain wort and adding extract, is you can add that extract way late in the boil to avoid darkening in that way as well. So, there's a lot of flexibility in the process that you can employ.
Yeah, when you're doing a partial mash beer, it's best to make your wort, your all grain wort, that part of it, boil that, and then at the very last minute, in the last couple minutes, add your malt extract, because the malt extract has been boiled and then boiled for condensing at the malt extract plant. So there's no need to boil it for the normal reason you boil an all grain wort is to coagulate the proteins and have them drop out and all that, and that's all been done with malt extracts. So you can add your extract late, and you should add your extract late, because otherwise you're just you're darkening the wort unnecessarily, and you're making a very high gravity wort that you're going to extract less hop bitterness from.
Mm-hmm. And that's you had a technique that you employed that you called the Texas two-step. Wasn't that about adding extract late in the boil?
What that was about was basically making two small batches of beer. You can do it just like a partial mash. You make 2.5 gallons one day, and then pitch that and get that started. Then make 2.5 gallons of wort the next day and add it. So that's an all grain technique, but it uses the equipment of partial mashing.
Ah, okay. It's been a while since we talked about that technique. It's been 16. I have 16 years worth of stuff in my head, so Stuff's going to fall out.
Yeah, that's okay. Like I think 4 people on the planet have ever tried that technique.
Sort of like my low tech method of lagering with pumps and ice things, and it works, but it's a little crazy. But so if you're an all grain brewer, and why should somebody want to add extract into their process if they're all happy with their all grainness?
One of the biggest reasons is just moving your brewery, into your kitchen versus outside. Like if you live in, Minnesota in the middle of winter, you're going to be freezing your sack off, your grain sack. And if you live in the South during the summer, it's hot, and moving it inside. And there's also just there's the simplicity to it. It's a little bit simpler brew day. And sometimes for the most part, I'm an all grain brewer, but every once in a while I just want to knock out a batch, and I don't want it to be, I still want it to be good, but I just, want to be able to, bang through the steps, fill a carboy, pitch the yeast, and be done with it without going through all the rigmarole that I do on a full all grain batch. So it's an option.
And also, if you want to boost your gravity, say if you're doing like a barley wine or a big old beer that you want to start off with a lot of gravity, in order to save time in boiling away a bunch of water, you can just add extract to your wort and bring up your gravity that way. It's a lot quicker, it's a lot easier, a lot less energy. And you essentially get the same result.
Yeah, exactly. You can, if you want to brew a large beer like a barley wine or something, you could, you could mash, and if you fully sparge it, you might end up with 8 or 9 gallons for a 5-gallon batch, and have to boil all that down to concentrate it. But if you want to do it, you do essentially a full mash, but collect, maybe 6.5 gallons, then do a 90-minute boil, and at the end add malt extract to bring your your gravity up to what you want. And you can actually, you can take a gravity reading, a couple minutes before the extract addition, see where you're at. And so, I mean, if you're interested in hitting an exact target, you can do that.
Let's take a quick break to talk about our friends and sponsors, Desiree and Dave from High Gravity Tulsa. What's another way to come in from the heat during the summer and save your grain sack? Ditch the propane and go electric with an electric brewing system from highdgravitybrew.com. I love my Warthog brewing system from highdgravitybrew.com. I also love to brew outside, but that's my choice. But if you brew with propane, that's your only safe option, because brewing inside, you're not supposed to do that with the propane. Electric brewing gives you a lot of control over your mash temperature and your boil strength, and at the same time, you don't have to worry about propane fumes or leaky gas connections, or just running out of gas from your canister and running to the store real quick. HighGravityBrew.com can help you take the pain out of propane with a system that's just right for you. Single, dual, or 3-vessel configurations from 5 gallons to 2 barrels. Check them all out at family-owned and operated HighGravityBrew.com. That's HighGravityBrew.com. And let's talk about recipe formulation. There are some, if you want to do it scientifically, there are some numbers that you can use to do your calculations. If you'll turn to page 31 in your Designing Great Beers book, this is where I learned how to formulate recipes, or got more confident in formulating recipes. Ray Daniels lists the extract potential of dry extract at 1045. So in other words, if you were to put 1 pound, and forgive me metric people, but if you were to put 1 pound of dry extract into 1 gallon of water, you would get a wort of 1045. Liquid malt extract is more like 1037 to 1039, and that's because there's still water in the liquid extract, and so it's more dilute. And then then the other ingredients like barley malt is gonna depend on your extract efficiency, in your system. But you're talking, like pale malt is like 1035 to 1037. So that's one pound in 1 gallon. So you can use those numbers and those gravity points to kind of calculate how much either grain to put in your extract recipe or vice versa to kind of hybridize your recipe, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's actually a whole article on that conversion at a Beer and Wine Journal. Is that what it's called? Yeah. beerandwinejournal.com. And yeah, I mean, the way that I always formulate recipes, partial mash recipes, I just take the all grain recipe, keep all the specialty grains at for a 5-gallon batch, keep all the specialty grains at the same level they wanted, then just sort of add those up, like how much total grain is that, and then I try to put at least as much base malt as the total amount of specialty malts, and more if I can, because I usually do a partial mash either in a 2-gallon beverage cooler or a 3-gallon, and there's a sort of specific amount that will fit in there.
And one technology that has entered the picture, maybe since the last time we talked about this, is brew in a bag. And so you can use, a kettle and do what I do and, preheat your oven, and set, to 150 degrees or whatever, or 65 Celsius or whatever your mash temperature is going to be, and stick it in there. But another variable that has come up was, in the beginning, most people shot for a target water to grain ratio of like 1.25 quarts per pound. But when I do, full batches of all grain, brew in a bag, I use all of my water, for the brewing process. I start off with 8 gallons, and then I put in 10 pounds of grain, and so that's like, I think is like 3.2 quarts per pound. So so that's pretty, and it works still. I don't get watery beers, but that's a whole lot more dilute than the old way of thinking. So, and I can do that in a no sparge fashion. So how does that affect how people can think about partial mashing? I mean, does that change the game about how they do the mashing part of it?
Yeah, I go for a little thinner mash on my partial mashes. Like you said, most people say, about 1.25 pounds of grain, or quarts of water per pound of grain. I usually go with 1 3/8. That's like 1.375 quarts of water per pound of grain. It just helps a little bit, I think, with a setup if you're doing it in the small coolers. And you can go thinner. There can be some problems with a thinner mash, and so I usually for partial mashes stick with the normal range. But I mean, you can go thinner, and also with a partial mash you can go ahead and sparge, so you don't need to. One of the things about brewing a bag is that you just yank the bag out and you're done, and then there's no sparging. But in partial mashing you can, and I sort of would say should, because one of the ways of partial mashing is you take a large grain bag, and if you've got like 2 to 3, maybe up to 4 pounds of grain, you just sort of steep that in your brew pot, in the right temperature range, and with the right amount of water, and then when the mashing time is over, just pull it out and stick it in a colander and set that above your brew pot, and then you can have a separate pot with some hot water in it, and pour that through the grains, and that just gives you a little bit better extract efficiency. And likewise with if you're doing it partial mash in the small coolers, all the grains are in a bag, and if it's a 2-gallon cooler, that'll fit up to 4 pounds of grain, and if it's a 3-gallon cooler, that'll fit up to 6 pounds of grain. It's all in that bag. You pour in stir in the hot mash water, and after 45 minutes or so, that's converted, and then you just take like a couple cups at a time of hot water and layer it on top of that, and then just open the spigot on the beverage cooler, and take out that much wort and put it in your brew pot, and then just keep add a couple cups of water at the top, drain a couple cups off of the bottom until you basically have whatever a good sort of rule of thumb is, basically whatever volume of wort you had as a mash, collect that much as wort going into your kettle. And if you do that, the wort will be around 10 Plato, specific gravity about 1040, and you'll be fully sparged, so you'll have got all you can, or almost all you can, out of the grains, but not over sparged, so it won't be all there won't be tannins in it, so it won't be astringent.
Mm-hmm. If you're working with you said at least get a 1-to-1 ratio of specialty malts to or specialty grains to your base malt. If you're working with, say, darker specialty grains, do you at that even a ratio, do you have to be more concerned about pH or other water chemistry factors that you've got to compensate for?
Yeah, if you're brewing a dark beer, there's sort of an interesting twist on partial mashing, is that, like, as an all grain beer, you would never brew a beer with, say, 50% roasted grain and 50% base malt, because the pH in that would be so low that that would screw the mash up. And so you can also not do a partial mash with that much that high the ratio of roasted grains to base malts. So what you do is make your partial mash with up to 10% of the darkest grains, the roasted, and then just steep the rest of the roasted grains, because those are steepable grains. They don't contribute starch to them. They're they're amongst the in the list of grains that extract brewers can steep, and not have to worry about the temperature of what they're steeping at, or the or the volume of water. So yeah, and then the sort of extra nice thing about that is that that actually lowers the percentage of malt extract in your beer. It's a little bit closer to an all grain beer, so it has proportionally more of that all grain wort aroma when you make the wort, and then that carries over to the beer.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you could say if you've got roasted barley or some really dark grains, you could just save those, and as you're bringing up the wort in the brew pot, up to say 170 degrees Fahrenheit, you could just steep it and pretend it's a standard extract beer, and do it that way, and I'm sure that would work well. I mean, Steve and I have done a Partagal batch where we split the wort. One of us got the big one of us got the small one, and did steeping of some dark grains in the smaller wort as a porter or something like that. And so it's a similar situation. It still works.
Yeah, you can. You've got a couple options. You can steep the dark grains in your brew pot, or better yet, when you're, as you said, when you're running off your wort into the brew pot, just have the dark grains sitting there in your brew pot, and they'll as you collect the wort, because that'll take a little while. They'll steep in there, and you get the color and flavor of those malts pretty quickly during steeping. You don't need to go for an extended amount of time. Or you can also steep them in. You can just steep them in hot water with like a tiny bit of malt extract, just enough to bring the specific gravity up to like 2 Plato, or 1.008, something like that. That just takes care of the pH. I mean, I know a lot of extract brewers just steep their extract, or their specialty grains in like a large volume of water, and that's, I mean, it works, quote unquote, but it's not optimal, because you get a little astringency out of it, or you can.
Now, if you're formulating a partial mash recipe, do you want to stick to, say, the lighter malt extracts? That you can get liquid malt extract and in all kinds of different malts, but there's also like amber malt extract and dark malt extract, and so does that add more sort of variables in the recipe formulation equation, or what's your preference? I guess you can make it with anything you want to, but if you're formulating a recipe,
it'll work with any color malt extract. But the thing is, most malt extract manufacturers don't say, or all of them, as far as I know, don't specify what's in that malt extract exactly. Like how much dark malt, blah blah blah. So you don't know how that malt extract ended up as amber or brown or dark. So I usually just use the ordinary light, malt extract, and either dried malt extract or the liquid malt extract, if you can get it when it's when it's definitely fresh, because that goes downhill pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. So what are your keys to success? I mean, we've got sort of a list of things that you've sent me that you see as the keys to success for a partial mash beer. What are the essentials that we got to be thinking of?
Yeah, well, there's cleaning and sanitation, of course, but there's also on the mash part, just hitting the right temperature and a correct water to grist volume. And in both cases, it's a range. For a mash, a single infusion mash can be ran at 148 up to 162 degrees Fahrenheit. With, the more usual range stated is 150 to 158, and a lot of homebrewers use 152 for all their quote unquote regular beers. If you don't want something that's either super dry or very very sweet, 152 is a good medium, a good temperature to make a beer with a reasonable amount of body. And then mash thickness, you can go down to one quart per pound. That's a fairly thick mash, thicker than most all grain brewers go, which is 1 1/4. I usually go at 1 3/8 quarts, but you can do it at 1.5 quarts per pound. You can do it at 2 quarts per pound. Whatever. There are consequences to different mash thicknesses, but you're not really going to notice it terrifically much.
I think on the thinner ones, if you stir a few times during the mash, that seems to help. Like for instance, when I do my, brew in a bag stuff at the 3 quarts per pound, I've noticed that stirring the mash every 10 or 15 minutes, you can really see on the refractometer, you can really observe the effect of keeping the wort sort of in motion, keeping those enzymes in contact with the stuff that they're supposed to break down.
Yeah, as you go with exceedingly, or when you go with thinner and thinner mashes, a couple things happen. One is a lot of the solids are going to fall to the bottom, and most of the sugars and carbohydrates are down there, and most of the enzymes too. But then it leaves this dilute top where the enzymes have to travel a long distance to run into any sugar. So yeah, stirring helps. And also just, making it easier on yourself and making a slightly thicker mash helps with that. But yeah, you can, there's a pretty fat window there that will work well.
And then if you're not, or if you are sparging, if you're using the cooler method, I guess the same rules apply. You don't want it to over sparge, because then you don't want to get. What are the parameters? What's the gravity that you don't want to get below as you're sparging?
If you were looking at the actual runnings, like most brewers cut off sparging sort of in the neighborhood of 2 Plato when you're which is a specific gravity of 1.008. Lower than that, generally the pH of the mash is going to have risen to a point where you can be pulling out silicates and stuff like that. Or another rule of thumb is keep sparging until your the water in your or the wort in your brew pot raises to or actually falls to a specific gravity of about 1040, which is 10 Plato. A fully sparged grain bed is going to yield a wort of about 1040. Yet another way to know if you sparge enough is that if the amount of wort you collect is roughly equal to the volume of your mash, you're in the right ballpark, especially for partial mashes. If you're doing large all grain batches, it's a little more than that, enough that you would want to, figure that out. And there's actually a chart on beer and wine journal.com. There's also a ton of recipes I sort of completely forgotten about that I did on there. And there's a lot of partial mash recipes there that if you are interested in trying it, but you don't want to start formulating your own recipes yet, there's pre-formulated recipes with the procedures written out, in detail, so you can give it a try.
And then water chemistry, the thing that I'm most afraid of in the world, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of people get a little bit freaky about water chemistry because, some of the discussions you hear, especially online, get into details that, they aren't that complicated. But then again, I was a chemistry major, so it didn't seem that. But, really, you do need to pay a little bit of attention to your water chemistry because you're mashing. You don't need to worry so much about the other water you use, the dilution. If you just treat that for chlorine, either by carbon filtration or adding a Camden tablet, that's fine. But for the water that goes in your mash, you're going to want it to be low in carbonates. Okay, and some, in some places in the United States, your water is naturally low in carbonates. Others, where if your water comes from a limestone aquifer, it's going to be relatively high in carbonates. And in that case, the easiest thing to do is dilute it or replace it with distilled water. But then you also need, or your beer is going to benefit greatly from having a decent amount of calcium in it. For most beers, something in the 50 part per million to 150 part per million range is going to be super. For darker beers, especially if there's also carbonate in your water, a little bit higher. But generally, if you're somewhere in the very large ballpark of 100 parts per million of calcium in your beer, you're going to be fine.
Now, does the fact that you're using extract, does that offer you a buffer? Sort of a bigger margin of error in the water chemistry department?
No, because you don't add the extract till the very end of the boil, so it's not affecting your partial mash at all.
But partial mashing can lead to, any number of recipes. It's appropriate for a ton of styles.
Yeah, you can brew almost anything that an all grain brewer can. Certainly you've opened up. If you're an extract brewer, your horizons are a little bit bigger with partial mashing. You can brew beers that are a little lighter in color. You can brew beers that are a little drier. you can use, there's a lot of malts that need to be mashed, and so you can, get those flavors into your beer that, there's a lot of base malts that don't have a malt extract equivalent. So yeah, there's a ton of benefits for moving from extract to partial mash, and also having the setup for a partial mash. It's totally cheap. It's basically all you need is a big grain bag in it, and either a 2 or a 3 gallon cooler. And if you still have your old extract equipment, which most all grain brewers have, and you could just there's a convenience factor of being able to brew either just a batch where you sort of it takes a little less time, or it gets you out of the elements if that's a factor.
So what are you working on? Have you got another book in the works?
Yeah, I'm writing a book for Brewers Publication called The Science and Craft of Brewing.
Wow, it's got a name.
It does. And we'll see if that's the name it ends up with. But right now that's a fairly descriptive title. So, yeah, so it should be pretty interesting. It talks a lot about science and brewing, and of course the intersection of brewing science. And there's also a little bit about brewing and craft in the sense of like craftsmanship and people taking care in doing something well. So, which I think is an interesting difference from a lot of brewers today.
Yeah, it should add a little more humanity to the. So it's not just a science textbook. It's got some heart in there. It sounds like.
Yeah, I don't think science is necessarily heartless, but I feel like I'm about to start ranting about something.
Oh, and look at the time.
Look at the time. Yeah, it's got it. It's going to be for brewers. It's probably more. Well, I don't know. I guess it's aimed at both home brewers and commercial brewers, because it's not like a how-to book. It's not like here's some sciencey thing, go do this in your brewery. It's about here's some things about basic science that touch on things in brewing, and just sort of the if you're just interested about all the things that feed into brewing and brewing technology, and a little bit of the history of brewing, how things developed, that sort of stuff.
Wow, that sounds really good.
Yeah, I hope so.
Do you have a date yet, or were you still in the infancy stage?
Manuscript's due in mid-July.
Ooh.
So I'm like in the final, it's like 6 weeks of writing it. So
you got to get started soon.
Yeah, a big chunk of it is done, and actually, I don't know if there's any big chunks of it done, but there's scraps of it. If you tied everything together right now, there's a lot of words, but there's some gaps between the different paragraphs that need to be filled in. And then I'm also trying to select diagrams and maybe even draw some, and
wow,
because there should be, this book's going to need a fair amount of like images and charts and graphs to help explain what's going on.
Wow. Well, I look forward to it, and hopefully, maybe you'll have time to poke your head out from that process between now and then to talk to us again.
Yeah, well, hopefully.
All right, Chris, always good to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thanks again to Chris. Best of luck with the book. I know there's nothing that inspires me to write more than a looming deadline. Chris is an excellent writer who really knows his stuff, so I'm really looking forward to that one. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to James at basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Check out our mobile-friendly shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Thanks to everybody supporting us through our Patreon page. Special goodies always coming your way. Check that out at patreon.com/basicbrewing. It's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. In the meantime, stay well and stay tuned. So long.